A man in a $10,000 suit walked into Elvis's dressing room and placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a check for $5 million and a request for one song. Elvis read the attached letter, looked at the man, and said 3 words that would become legendary. "Get out. Now." It was February 12, 1974, at the Las Vegas Hilton. Elvis had just finished the first show of his 2-week residency, and the crowd had been electric. He was sitting in his dressing room, still wearing his white jumpsuit studded with rhinestones, when there was a knock at the door. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager, opened it to find a man in his 50s wearing what looked like a custom-tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. The man carried an expensive leather briefcase and had the air of someone who was used to getting whatever he wanted. "I need to speak with Mr. Presley," the man said. "It's about a business opportunity." Elvis got dozens of business propositions every week. Most of them were legitimate: endorsement deals, movie offers, special concert requests. Joe was about to send the man away when Elvis waved him in. "5 minutes," Elvis said, his voice tired but polite. "I've got another show in 3 hours." The man walked in, set his briefcase on the coffee table, and extended his hand. "Mr. Presley, my name is Richard Ashford. I'm a businessman from New York, and I'm here to make you the most lucrative offer of your career." Elvis shook his hand but didn't smile. He'd heard variations of this pitch 1,000 times before. Richard Ashford opened his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a personal check already filled out. He placed it on the table in front of Elvis. The check was for $5 million. Elvis glanced at it but didn't pick it up. "That's a lot of money," he said carefully. "What exactly are you buying for that?" "One song," Richard said, sitting down without being invited. "I want you to sing 'Can't Help Falling in Love' at a private event I'm hosting. 20 minutes of your time. $5 million. The easiest money you'll ever make." Joe Esposito, standing by the door, let out a low whistle. $5 million in 1974 was an astronomical sum, equivalent to over $30 million in today's money. It was more than Elvis made in a year, even at the height of his Vegas residency. Elvis leaned back in his chair. "What's the event?" "A private party," Richard said smoothly. "Very exclusive, about 100 guests. It's for my son's 8th birthday." That's when Elvis's expression changed. He sat forward slightly. "Your son is 8 years old?" "Yes," Richard said. "Christopher. He's a big fan of yours." "Well, he was." The past tense hung in the air like smoke. "Was?" Elvis asked. Richard's face remained neutral, businesslike. "Christopher has leukemia, Mr. Presley. He's been fighting it for 3 years. The doctors say he has less than a month left. Maybe 2 weeks. I want to give him the best birthday party money can buy before he goes." The room went quiet. Joe looked down at his shoes. Elvis's face softened immediately. "I'm sorry to hear that," Elvis said, and he meant it. "That's a terrible thing for a parent to go through." "Thank you," Richard said, "which is why I'm willing to pay whatever it takes to make his final birthday memorable. My son loves your music. 'Can't Help Falling in Love' is his favorite song. If you could sing it at his party, it would mean everything to him." Elvis nodded slowly. On the surface, this seemed like a beautiful gesture, a wealthy father trying to give his dying son one last perfect moment. Elvis had done similar things before. He'd visited sick children in hospitals, sung for them privately, even paid for medical treatments. This seemed like the same kind of thing, just with a check attached. "Mr. Ashford," Elvis said, "I appreciate the offer, but I don't need $5 million to sing for a sick child. If your son wants to hear me sing, I'll do it for free. Just tell me when and where." Richard Ashford smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "That's very generous, Mr. Presley, but I insist on paying. This isn't charity. This is business. I'm purchasing a performance, and I always pay for what I purchase." Something about the way he said "purchasing a performance" made Elvis uncomfortable. There was something off about this whole interaction, something that didn't sit right. "Tell me about the party," Elvis said. "What exactly are you planning?" Richard pulled out a folder from his briefcase and opened it. Inside were detailed plans, a guest list, a schedule, a venue layout. It's going to be at my estate in Beverly Hills, he explained. February 20th. 100 guests, mostly business associates and their families. We'll have a catered dinner, some entertainment, and then you'll perform. One song, that's all. Then you're free to leave. Elvis took the folder and started reading through it. The guest list was there, and the names on it were familiar. Business executives, Hollywood producers, a few politicians. But as Elvis read further, something started to bother him. These people, Elvis said, pointing to the list, they're not children, they're adults, business associates. Correct, Richard said. I thought this was your son's birthday party. It is, Richard said. Christopher will be there, of course. He'll be the guest of honor. But you've invited 100 adults to an 8-year-old's birthday party? It's not just for Christopher, Richard said, his tone becoming slightly defensive. It's also a networking opportunity. I'm combining business with pleasure. 2 birds, 1 stone. That's when Elvis started to understand what was really happening here. This wasn't a birthday party for a dying child. This was a social event where a dying child was the centerpiece, the attraction that would make the party memorable for Richard Ashford's business contacts. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Elvis said, his voice getting quieter, which anyone who knew him recognized as a bad sign. You're hosting a party for business purposes, and you want to use your dying son as the entertainment? That's not what this is, Richard said quickly. Christopher wants this party. He wants his friends there. What friends? Elvis asked, looking back at the guest list. I don't see any children on this list except your son. Where are his school friends? His cousins? Other kids? Richard shifted in his seat. Christopher doesn't have many friends. He's been sick for so long, the other children from his school don't really visit anymore. So you're throwing him a party full of adults he doesn't know, and you want me to sing for them while your son watches from a wheelchair? Mr. Presley, you're misunderstanding. No, Elvis interrupted, standing up. I understand perfectly. You want to throw a party that'll impress your business buddies, and you're using your sick son to make it special. You want them to see that you're so connected, so powerful, that you can get Elvis Presley to show up. And the fact that your son is dying? That's just the story that makes it all more dramatic, more memorable, better for conversation later. Richard Ashford's face went red. That's not fair. I love my son. Everything I do is for him. If you loved your son, Elvis said, his voice hard now, you'd be at home with him right now, not in Vegas trying to buy a singer for your party. You'd throw him a party with kids his own age, not 100 business contacts. You'd spend these last weeks with him, not planning an event that's really about you. You don't understand, Richard said, standing up as well. Christopher asked for this. He wants to see you perform. Then bring him to one of my shows, Elvis said. I'll get him front row seats. I'll bring him backstage. I'll spend an hour with him, just him and his family. I'll give him an afternoon he'll remember for however long he has left. But I won't be part of your circus. Richard's jaw clenched. I'm offering you $5 million. And I'm telling you to get out. The room went completely silent. Joe Esposito stood frozen by the door. Richard Ashford stared at Elvis in disbelief. Did you just... I said, Elvis repeated, his voice like steel. Get out, now. Richard grabbed his briefcase and the check, his face purple with rage. You're making a mistake, Presley. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know what kind of connections I have? I don't care if you know the president, Elvis said. I don't care if you own half of New York. You're not using me to put on a show where a dying child is the prop. Now get out of my dressing room before I have security throw you out. Richard Ashford stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the small space. Joe Esposito let out a long breath. Elvis? That was $5 million. That was blood money, Elvis said, sitting back down heavily. That man doesn't want to give his son a beautiful memory. He wants to throw a party where he's the star and his dying kid is the opening act. You could have taken the money, Joe said quietly. You could have done the gig and used the money for something good. Elvis shook his head. The minute I take that check, I'm agreeing with what he's doing. I'm saying it's okay to treat a dying child like a conversation piece, and I won't do that. What happened next showed the kind of man Elvis really was. He picked up the phone and called Judy, his secretary back in Memphis. Judy, I need you to find some information for me. Richard Ashford, New York businessman. He has an 8-year-old son named Christopher who's dying of leukemia. Get me the hospital he's being treated at. 2 days later, Elvis flew to New York. Not for $5 million, not for a party, not for publicity. He went to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital and asked to see Christopher Ashford. The nurses didn't believe it at first. Elvis Presley just walking into the pediatric oncology ward unannounced. But there he was, carrying a guitar and wearing sunglasses, asking which room Christopher was in. One nurse actually dropped her clipboard when she recognized him. Christopher was alone when Elvis walked in. His father was at work, probably in another meeting, making another deal. His mother was in the cafeteria grabbing coffee. The little boy was sitting in his bed, bald from chemotherapy, watching television with the sound off. The room was filled with get-well cards, but it felt empty somehow. "Hey there, Christopher," Elvis said softly. The boy turned and his eyes went wide. For a moment, he couldn't speak. "I heard you like my music," Elvis said, pulling up a chair. "And I heard you were having a birthday soon. 8 years old, right?" Christopher nodded, still speechless. "Well, I couldn't make it to your party," Elvis said, "but I thought I could stop by now instead. Would that be okay?" "You're really here?" Christopher whispered. "I'm really here," Elvis said, "and I brought my guitar. Think your nurses would mind if I sang a little?" For the next 2 hours, Elvis sat in that hospital room with Christopher Ashford. He sang "Can't Help Falling in Love." He sang "Love Me Tender." He sang "Teddy Bear." He taught Christopher some guitar chords, his small fingers barely able to reach around the neck. He told him stories about making movies and performing in Vegas and all the funny things that happened on stage. He signed every piece of paper in the room, medical charts, get-well cards, even the menu from the hospital cafeteria. When Christopher's mother returned and found Elvis Presley sitting on her son's hospital bed, she broke down crying. Elvis stayed until visiting hours were over. Before he left, he gave Christopher his scarf, the one he'd been wearing on stage just 2 nights ago. "You keep this," Elvis told him, "and whenever you're scared or hurting, you hold on to it and remember that Elvis Presley came all the way to New York just to hang out with you. Because you're special, Christopher. Not because you're sick, not because your dad is rich, but because you're you." Christopher held that scarf and cried. "My dad wanted you to come to a party." "I know," Elvis said, "but I like this better. Just you and me. No party, no crowd, just friends." Christopher died 3 weeks later. Elvis sent flowers to the funeral and a personal letter to Christopher's mother. In the letter, he wrote, "The most valuable thing we can give someone isn't what we can buy or perform. It's our time and genuine care." Richard Ashford never spoke to Elvis again. The story stayed private for years. Only Joe Esposito, Elvis, and the Ashford family knew what happened. 20 years after Elvis died, Christopher's mother finally told the story in an interview. She explained how Elvis turned down $5 million because he saw through the phoniness. "Elvis knew what my husband didn't," she said. "Our son didn't need a party with 100 strangers. He needed someone to make him feel important. Elvis did that, not for money, not for publicity, because it was right." The interview went viral. People couldn't believe Elvis had turned down what today would be $30 million. But those who knew Elvis understood. This was the man who bought Cadillacs for strangers and stopped concerts to help people in the crowd. Elvis saw his fame as a responsibility. Part of that responsibility was knowing when someone tried to use him for wrong reasons. The story reminds us that some things can't be bought. Integrity isn't for sale. Real kindness doesn't have a price tag. Elvis could have taken $5 million. He could have sung one song and walked away richer. But he would have felt dirty knowing he'd been part of treating a dying child like entertainment. Instead, he gave Christopher something priceless, being treated like a person, not a prop, real connection instead of performed emotion, 2 hours of genuine attention instead of one song for strangers. That's worth more than any check could ever be. If this story moved you, make sure to like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that doing right is worth more than doing profitable. Have you ever turned down something because it didn't feel right? Let us know in the comments and hit that notification bell for more true stories about the man behind the legend.